Welcome back, Father Cristino.
Thank you.
I noticed that you're wearing your cassock today.
Oh, well, I guess that means I'm just a conservative priest.
Well, let's talk about that.
Okay, let's.
The New York Times came out with an article relatively recently speaking about the young priests of, I believe, America who are bold, conservative, orthodox, according to a survey, I believe, of 3,500 priests. So that's a significant sample of priests. And their results were kind of interesting. So I thought maybe what I'll do is I'll read part of the article and then I'll get your reaction.
Sure.
It states, more than 80% of the priests ordained since 2020 describe themselves as theologically conservative/orthodox or very conservative/orthodox, according to a nationally representative survey of 3,500 priests published by the Catholic Project at the Catholic University of America. So your reaction to this?
I find it, the thing that stands out to me about the formulation of those statements is the dynamic of conservative/orthodox. And when I saw that, my first question was, who put it that way? Was it the survey creator who saw that they needed to find an expanded way of describing what they are trying to get at by calling someone a conservative person or an orthodox person? I've always personally just bristled at those categories because I don't think they're helpful, particularly for we in a kind of British parliamentary, American, Canadian context. Conservative and progressive or liberal, those categories, they just mean something strictly political. And it's better that they be left there because I think the people that they're talking about in this survey, the priests who are identifying themselves, maybe because they're forced to, because that's what the survey question asks, as conservative, don't mean by that what a political category means as conservative. And so the qualifier of orthodox, I think, is trying to capture more of the essence, which is, I love and fully embrace all of the teachings of the church. I don't have any objections to what the church teaches. I try my best to convey what the church teaches. I love the fullness of our tradition, but I don't necessarily call myself a traditionalist. I think that's a lot of what people mean in this context when they use a word like conservative.
Yes.
But it can quickly turn into being associated with right-wing politics, and therefore, if your politics are objectionable on some fronts, well, then you can be more easily dismissed. And I think that that's just counterproductive to what we need to be doing if we're going to be building up the body of Christ, which is what the mission of the priest is.
The category, though, of asking one young priest orthodoxy, like, as opposed to, well, the survey got into the difference. He says, it says, but still not a single surveyed priest who was ordained after 2020 described himself as very progressive. So these categories are not necessarily, they say something.
Right.
So what does it say? What does it say about the young man who's been ordained? Well, all of the young men who have been ordained since 2020, according to this survey, that don't describe themselves as progressive. Interesting to know what you think that means. And then they would, assumingly, set aside the conservative political part of it, consider themselves orthodox or very orthodox. What does that say about the young men?
So I think it's, okay, well, first I should identify myself as a vocation director. In my diocese, the role that I have, in addition to being a parish priest, is to accompany and oversee the formation of the young men who are training to become priests for our diocese. So this is my world, this is my wheelhouse, and I spend a lot of time with these guys. I spend a lot of time with discerners, and the whole idea that our seminarians are becoming too traditional or that they're traditionally minded, my first question for that would be, what's the alternative? If that's true, okay, fine, I'll grant that. What is it that means they're missing? What is it that you think that means that they should be more open to, or that should be different about them? And I don't know what the answer to that is. I don't know that anyone knows what they think the guy who is traditional is missing. If what they think he's missing is openness to other things, I would want to know what those things are. Because these guys, I think, are very open to many things. But are they open to the possibility that the church's teaching should be changed on something? No, they're not. And what does that mean? Does that mean they're rigid? No. Rigidity comes from the unwillingness to be flexible on things that can bend. Some things can't bend. Some things are just true. And they don't require flexibility. They require patience in application. They require understanding. They require sensitivity. But it's not bending the thing to make it work for you. It's bending maybe my approach to how I convey this to you so that I can convey it as effectively as possible to you. And I see our traditional young men in the seminary who do want to be that way and who are open to correction, specifically from me, when I can point out to them ways in which I think they're not, or ways in which I worry that they might not be as effective in their ministry down the road if they don't address this way that they think, or this way that they speak, or the jokes that they make, or the things that they wish were different. Mm-hmm. They're open to that. They receive that. If that's not flexibility, then I don't know what is. But it certainly isn't rigidity. If they were that rigid, they would tell me to take a hike and that I'm some flaming liberal and they can't trust me, and so they're leaving our diocese and going to join whatever other thing they're going to join.
Right, so careful not to name a diocese there.
Yes, exactly.
What do you think it is meant by a progressive priest?
I think, well, the word progressive means seeking ongoing change. That's what progress is allegedly supposed to be, that we're always ready to move in a new direction, always ready to take things up in a different way. And I just don't think that ever should apply to doctrine and our teaching. Doctrine can develop. That doesn't mean that it's changing. But what can change is the manner in which we try to proclaim the gospel. And I wish that people could see that maybe adjusting the way in which we are seeking to proclaim the gospel at this moment in history, which happens to look like something we would associate with the past or traditionalism, maybe, just maybe, that's being progressive. Maybe it's saying we are going to try a different way. We are going to take a new approach to sharing the truths of the faith. So what if it happens to resemble how something might have been done many years ago? If it hasn't been done for a long time, it's as new now as it would be if we were inventing something from scratch. Mm-hmm. And so I think that if we're going to see progressivism as being something positive, it has to be rooted in the capacity to see doing things in a traditional manner as also being progressive. Yeah. And if it can't be, then I don't accept your definition of progressive.
Well, I think I think my assumption of the survey is that a progressive is one who wants some of the church's teachings changed in some way or moved. Or right. I think that's what it's at. I think that's fair. That's probably what they're getting at.
I assume so, yeah.
So why do you think that young men are not attracted to that, as opposed to attracted to the orthodoxy of the faith, wanting it all, wanting the tradition, wanting not to change the teachings? Like, why does a young man want that now, as opposed to maybe back in 60s, 70s, it was a little different, because there was the air was filled, they said, with change.
Yes.
And in some respects, there was a lot of change that was happening. So why are young men not attracted to that?
Because they're exhausted from the instability that constant change produces. And that translates into going in search of something constant and stable and predictable, tried, tested, and true, that they can really sink their teeth into, that they can have as an anchor. Because the young men of this generation have grown up in a time where everything was up for grabs. You can't stay caught up with anything. Your technology is constantly developing. You just got a subscription to this streaming service, but here's a better one. You just started playing this video game, but here's a newer model. Everything they've ever tried to do was already obsolete before they even figured out how to use it or got good at it. And it's produced, as I refer to it, an instability, a feeling like you're constantly on shifting sand. And that's exhausting. If you can't walk on a tightrope forever because it's exhausting. You'll fall. Or if you manage to stay on, eventually your body just can't take what is required of it to stay on top of that. You need something firm that you can set your feet down on and not wonder if it's about to get pulled out from underneath you. And so they go looking and they find the 2,000-year history and tradition of the church's teaching and liturgy and her beauty. And they say, yes, I can set my feet down on this. I don't want it to change. I don't want it to shake. I don't want to know what's the next thing that's going to be different. They're grateful that they have something sturdy to set their feet on. And I actually think that that's for most Catholics. I'll go even one step more general and say that's just for young people right now. And young people are entering the church at an alarming rate. I work not only in vocations, but in university and young adult chaplaincy. Every year, it's not necessarily gotten to the point where it's doubling year by year, but the number of young people who are entering the church every Easter. In our young adult chaplaincy alone, we had 31 people baptized and confirmed.
It's beautiful.
Who I would say the average age, probably somewhere around 24. They're looking for something that can provide some stability in their life. And if the church becomes one of the things that's just like everything else around them, that's constantly changing and growing and re-examining itself to see how it can be better, we're going to lose them because that's what they're fleeing from.
Right. But doesn't the church lose its relevance when it does that? It becomes like everything else.
I think that's what those who are agitating for it to be that way don't realize, because they grew up in everything being like that. And if they notice that the church isn't, then that's what they react to. Oh, I'm part of the one thing that can't stay caught up with everything else. As opposed to realizing that it's a blessing that I'm part of the one thing that just remains the same, that is stable and firm and predictable. People don't appreciate how much they're drawn to that until they've lived an entire life without ever having it.
We also have this interesting, some might call it a phenomenon, but I think it's a grace, a special grace, of these celebrity conversions. Mm-hmm. And I think it's wonderful. It's wonderful. High-profile people in the public's eye who might have a social media platform, or Candace Owens comes to mind. Mm-hmm. Why do you think it's these high-profile people all of a sudden it seems like there's a momentum all of a sudden?
Well, they live in the eye of the storm of this instability, where their career is hanging by a thread. You say one wrong thing, you get canceled.
Yeah.
You appear at one wrong place at one wrong time, you get canceled. Your social media post that you put on imprudently, it doesn't get taken down fast enough. You're canceled. And 5 million people are watching because you're a celebrity. I think they live under that burden. And then when they discover that there's a thing that says, this is how we deal with people who make mistakes, you go to confession. You have a prayer prayed over you that's thousands of years old, with the authority of Almighty God, setting you free from that mistake. I think they must breathe a sigh of relief to realize that that's a thing. And so then they want it. I believe that's where they're coming from, the context. But then there are also many people who I would call maybe celebrities because they're public intellectuals, because they do a lot of thinking and talking out loud in a public manner, who then are confronted by the intellectual tradition of the Catholic faith, and it overpowers them. I think of the recently named vice presidential candidate of Donald Trump, J.D. Vance. He has very publicly acknowledged the intellectual battle that he went on in pursuit of the truth, only to be overpowered by St. Augustine. And now is as a confirmed and practicing Catholic. And to his credit, the former President Trump doesn't see that as a liability, right? Whereas nowadays in politics, if you're a Catholic, it's automatically assumed that you're not going to serve the best interests of your people because you're just going to do whatever the church tells you have to do. An intellectual like J.D. Vance would say, what if the church tells us what we have to do is because it's right, and that it is actually for the good of all people if we just did it? I think he would have the boldness to make a comment like that and then take the heat that would come pouring down on him from every direction for his anti-progressive way. And he would just be disregarded as another mindless conservative who just wants to reserve in the present the relics of the past, or however they might put it. But I think actually what's happening there is someone saying, no, we need to be humble enough to admit that as time goes by, some things don't change. Some things remain always true. And it might have to be applied differently than it is now, or than it was before, compared to how it must be now. But that is not the same as subscribing to never-ending progress. And that exhaustion from having to live in that, I think it's interesting you make that comparison. These celebrity conversions, I think it's something quite similar to what we're seeing with the nature of the priests that we are seeing emerge from our seminaries and houses of formation at this time. They just want something to stand on. And then they'll be willing to die for it.
I think Chesterton said something to the effect of that the mind, we can't be so open-minded that our brains fall out.
Right.
That they need to be closed upon something, and that something is truth. How does the Catholic tradition propose thinking differently than an atheist and how they think? Do you think there is a difference of how the Catholic mind thinks as opposed to one who does not acknowledge that there is a God?
Absolutely. There has to be a difference. And I think the difference is the starting point of the intellectual project. In Catholicism, the starting point is God, the objective reality outside of ourselves, however you want to call it. And it is my attempt at trying to ascend towards that. The atheist starting point, by definition, has to be me and what I observe, and then I pull everything down into where I'm starting from. So in the Catholic intellectual tradition, we are saying where I am is not where I am meant to be. And we allow ourselves to be lifted up by greater minds and greater discoveries than ourselves. And if God is so gracious in blessing us with the ability to do so, He will make it such that we become part of those who have made a contribution that will impact those who come behind. The atheistic tradition, if we want to call it that, is grasping at those things and then trying to force them down into their way of seeing it. And now it's a battle of wills. I have to convince you that what I'm saying is right, as opposed to allowing myself to be overwhelmed by what is right because it is right. Those are drastically different starting points.
So if there's a young man that's watching this right now and he's considering the priesthood in an ever-shifting world and the sands are shifting underneath him, what would you say to him about Catholicism and the priesthood?
I would say that the Catholic priesthood is an indescribably beautiful gift from Christ to his church, which is the guarantee of his promise that he made at the end of Matthew's gospel. I am with you always until the end of the age. It is the priest who enters into every imaginable circumstance of people's lives to be Christ to them in that moment. Because in every moment of need, it is only Christ who we're looking for. And so to get to be that stability to someone who in a moment of crisis or in a moment of desperation or even in a moment of joy is just looking for that stability, to know that I can participate in being for that person what Christ is for all people. That's the stability that I have set my feet on when I have embarked upon the pursuit of the Catholic priesthood. It's not to serve me. It's not so that I said earlier that young men are exhausted by the instability of the culture around them, and so they're just looking for something stable. They're not looking for that stable thing so that they can just lay down and take a nap on it. They're looking for that stable thing so that they can be stable, so that they can be a firm, planted anchor that the rest of this unstable world can turn to and look to and cling to, and only then discover that they have actually found Christ himself. So don't be afraid to pursue the Catholic priesthood.
Thanks for your thoughts.